Hi, friends and comrades, and welcome to an emergency edition of the End of Sport podcast, Out of Left Field. My name is Nathan Coleman Lamb, and I am joined by my friends Derek Silva, back from Portugal. Derek, how you doing?
Very well, very well.
Good. Priyansh, how about you?
Doing all right. It's not that considering the state of the world. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And one of my very oldest friends and friend of the podcast, Sina Rahmani of The East, is a podcast. Sina, how you doing?
Hi guys. I'm okay. I'm fried. I'm fried for a crazy weekend, but it's good
Yeah.
to see you guys. Nathan, yes. If you don't know this, Nathan is one of my oldest friends. We've known each other over 25 years, possibly 20 years.
Too
Yeah.
many years.
So it's good to be on a show. I remember when you guys started this show, and I'm excited. I've seen it grow, so it's been great to watch. And so I'm excited to be here, except it's an insane time in the world.
Yeah, it's such an insane time in the world. So we're gonna get it. That's what we're here to do, is to talk about the madness with the Epstein Empire and Iran. But I just want to actually shout out for folks listening, because we're doing a rare thing where we record and then we release immediately because of the urgency of this. But we actually have two amazing episodes coming later this week as well. On Tuesday, we talked to Nikhil Pal Singh about Homeland Empire, and on Thursday we have Vijay Prashad on Cuba. So those are two that we're really excited to share with you as well. So please tune in for those as well. So let's talk about what's happened with Iran. And Sina's going to kind of like give us more context, because this is something that obviously he's been following really, really closely for his entire life. But, recent years, he's been paying attention to the nuances of what has transpired with the West and Iran. But just to hit a few of the most depraved notes before, I kind of turn it over to Sina, what we have seen in the process of the last couple of days with this really barbaric, again, we call it Epstein Empire. It was Israeli-American assault on Iran. After, by the way, honestly, like in the most bad faith possible, conning Iran into weeks of negotiations that like accidentally worked. Essentially, like the US got the outcomes that they supposedly have wanted to get for decades from Iran. And then they were just like, but fuck it, we've been planning to kill you anyway, and we're gonna attack regardless of the fact that those negotiations, which again, Iran conducted in good faith. But obviously the US and Israel had no interest in their part of that bargain. And as a consequence, we saw 165 people, most of them children, killed at a girls' school, murdered at a girls' school. Absolutely horrific. We've still already seen Israel bomb a Tehran hospital, because like that has to be in the absolute first wave. Dropsite reported, and I'm going to quote from Dropsite here, in another incident, dozens of teenage girls were attending their regular training sessions of volleyball, basketball, and gymnastics in the main sports hall in Lamerd, a city near the Persian coast, when a missile slammed into the building at 5 p.m. on Saturday. According to local officials cited in Iranian state media, the strikes on Lamerd killed at least 18 civilians and wounded scores more. Right. So, these are just a few of the many atrocities we have already seen unfold. Sina, can you just tell us a little bit? I mean, from your standpoint, why did this happen? What has happened? What are your kind of like, high level takeaways here?
Yeah. So so I've been sort of thinking about this at the sort of bird's eye view and trying to put it in a larger context. I mean, I'm just going to do the thing which is easiest to do, which is to kind of pull back and think about the last 2 months, because really this started 2 months ago in what began as a kind of currency crisis. Like there was this kind of there was a sort of outflow issue. The details of it are like not clear to me because I don't care enough to look into it. Like I just know like imperialists use currency crises and it's something they can do because they own the systems around currencies. So why not? Why wouldn't you? So that helped spark it worsened an already bad situation, pushed people into the streets. And then those protests kind of smoldered into basically what was like a nationwide ISIS attack. Kind of a sort of a version of things that we've seen in other countries before. I think the first thing that came to mind was like the Urumqi attacks in maybe 2010, 11, because those were like knife attacks and at the subway. I'm sort of mixing these things up, but it smelled like a kind of violence that I'd seen before in other places. And of course, with the CIA's fingerprints. So I instantly knew, I was like, oh, this is ISIS, which is another word for Mossad, which is another word for CIA. Like, this is all connected. And in fact, the people themselves, Mike Pompeo, were like crowing about how like a Mossad agent walking beside them, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So like that was part of this here too, is that this kind of open flaunting of their involvement, because like it's more important for them to flex on their enemies to their own people than it is to sort of continue the charade that imperialists put on in these moments, which is, oh, popular unrest leads to the fall of the regime, which has actually happened before. Like if you look up 1953 videos from 1953, the coup, the title on Pathé, which is the British Imperial News Service, is Persian Revolts, right? It's easy for imperialists to stage revolts. It's easy to do that. That's a technology they've advanced in. Like, so when it was happening, I was saying to people like, this is a Maidan. They did Maidan. This is a freaking Maidan, because it's a perfect, what's the cost to them? They already have people in the country. There is a part of the population that does want to work with them. How big of a part is a question we can debate. And I certainly wouldn't be able to know, not living there. But I know it exists, because those were the people who enacted this kind of thing. To say that it was purely foreign is ridiculous. It's to deny the obvious, that this was an attack by a certain class of mostly fascist Iranians, maybe themselves not really involved per se or having agency in all this, which is to say they weren't part of whatever this was, which was a coup d'etat attempt, because it wasn't just street unrest. And the street unrest was something that that kind of violence was insanely new, has not been seen on the streets in nothing like this. And also the hysteria, the media psyop part of it, of 80 bajillion dead, 40 quadrillion dead, 18 trillion billion quadrillion, like this kind of hysterical, like these are not just coincidences, right? Like this is a well-worn strategy. But of course, Zionists are the corniest fucking people in the world, and they can't sustain a charade for anything. So like in the midst of all this, they're crowing about their involvement, but then they're also like inflating these numbers, making themselves look more ridiculous. But because they have complete media dominance here, that doesn't get questioned, is because repeated on nauseum. And this continued. In the meantime is then a buildup. So the protesters coming to the rescue of the protesters. But interestingly though, is that something broke the script of how this was supposed to go, because that violence that flared up, it was like January 8th, 9th, I want to say. Yeah. And then there was like a digital lockdown for like another, I want to say 10 days afterwards. The days are such a blur now, I can't remember. I feel like it's a while, like it took a while for them to come back online, because as the violence really kicked off, the state turned off the internet, which is itself something we should like think about and talk about, because it's like mind-boggling to think, like 90 million people. Iran is not a small country. It's a very big country. It's 2 Canadas now, 2.5. And it's much smaller geographically than Canada. So imagine like turning off the internet for that kind of population. I mean, Tehran is 16 million or something. It's big. And it's wider, something like that. It's like, I have to double check. But like, so in the midst of all this, that attempt at a coup, which used the street unrest as a kind of diversion, but also to bog down the state and to sort of commit something. They probably did all kinds of fuckery during that, like, because you hold down the resources of the state. They like attacked like fire stations and fire trucks to ensure maximum damage from arson. And arson was like a potent weapon in all of this. But the Iranian state authorities got it under control in like 2 nights. They did a Starlink hack. For people who haven't been following this, like basically what happened was Starlink played a huge role in Iranian internet for the last several years. It's been in the country for a while. It was mostly organized by kind of more criminal elements, from what I've learned. Like these aren't legal, obviously, but they're also independent. So like if you have a Starlink terminal, you can just plug it in and boom, you have fast, good, cheap internet. So like there was also situations where people were sharing one in like an apartment complex or something. So it wasn't just like people with bad intentions who had Starlink, but lots of people, especially after June, when it became clear that Starlink terminals were being used in the attacks on the ground of these ground assets, people started to give them up and like didn't want to be seen with them. But some people still kept them. And I'm getting this from a listener of the show who basically gave me a rundown on Instagram and like a long message, and I was like, wow, I had no idea. Because my aunt is like my connections to Iran are older. They're like my boomer aunt, my boomer relatives. Like I talk to my cousins a bit, but we're not like super in touch. I should be, and not that many of them are there yet still. So it's so I didn't really understand like, okay, Starlink, what degree it was, but during the midst of that 2-night sort of like insane terrorist attack, like nationwide terrorist attack, what essentially is a terrorist attack, the Iranian authorities managed to not only like hack Starlink, but find out who was using it where. Like it leaves a kind of radio wave trail that a state authority can find you. So if someone sees, you don't have to necessarily see a dish. And God knows what other methods the Iranians had to find people with them. Like Iranians have drones. Drones can study people's rooftops. It's not something you can just hide, right? So like they probably allowed the systems to flourish because for a bit, because sometimes it makes more sense to just let something illegal happen and see what they do with it than just stamping it out right away, making it go underground. So I imagine that was like part of this, whatever this countermeasure was to, in the long term, recognize that, yeah, Starlink is an asset of the US empire. This commercial end of it is probably just an excuse and a cover for its military, more powerful end. So it's like, that's obviously why Elon has the power, even though he doesn't make any money, right? Like he's obviously like in cahoots with like the US military industrial complex. So like Starlink is one of these nodes of US imperial control in these projects, and all of a sudden they lost it. And not only that, they were able to find the people using it and neutralize those networks. And beyond that, at least to some degree, I mean, I imagine they're still there. I imagine they weren't able to capture everybody who was like murdering people that night. Now the Westoid Iranians will say, oh, the state did it. And the fact is, we don't know who killed whom, and the scale of the violence, considering the fact that on the first night, Iranian authorities were not allowed to use live ammunition, should tell you something. That cops don't stab people to death. They don't machete people to death. They don't like behead people. Like this is ISIS stuff. This is stuff of like guerrilla. This is like weird. It's not even guerrilla. It's like an insult to like guerrilla, but it's basically like low-level, low-tech insurgency. But the Iranian state defeated that insurgency. And I think that this was supposed to happen then. This was supposed to happen during that time, that the signal during all of this would have been an attack on Khamenei, martyr Khamenei, and that would have been it. But because they threw a wrench in this, because they very like quickly nipped it in the bud, and then the internet came back online 10 days later, where it became clear that there's no videos of like cops mowing down people like it's some freaking Subway Surfer game. Like it's not possible to like kill that scale of people and not leave a trace of it, a kind of visual. Iranians have phones, they could record it, and if there was footage, you know that every freaking like news service would have it out there. So the evidence wasn't there for what they have. In the meantime, like the PSYOP has still been running, even though the evidence is clearly not there, of like some insane state massacre of innocent protesters. And even though like libs have continued this line shamelessly, people I know, that it's just like boggles the mind. So fast forward to where we are now, where you then followed up this insane military buildup that was happening in public. They were like, we're going to attack. We're going to attack. We're going to attack. Like just chanting that we're going to do it. In the meantime, running this negotiations farce. Now, Nate, I will say that I think the Iranians knew that this was all a farce, and they themselves participated in it for the sake of their own people. Because you have to remember that Iranian society is profoundly divided along the issue of what to do with these European imperialists who won't leave us the fuck alone. What do we do with them? So this is a question that every single colonized or semi-colonized, and Iran was never colonized, but it was certainly conquered politically and militarily for periods of time, and also rendered basically toothless. And so Iran's rise from a vassal third world oil state under the thumb of this like brutal loser son, like Pahlavi, there was no house of Pahlavi. The guy was a horse. He was like a fucking stable boy. the guy's dad. He was like a stable boy for the Brits. And he like did a violent coup d'etat and was like, I am the king now. And then he made his stupid son king who abdicated not once, but twice. Okay. So it's the only family. So they had 3 abdications. Two were forced. One was forced by the British imperialists because they said, sorry, you're getting too close to the Germans. That was the father, the stable boy turned king. So they plucked him out like the claw game. And then the son, they put the son in because he's more of a quisling. And then what happened? He fled the moment he faced any kind of opposition. He fled because that's what they do. He went to Italy. And then the big boys had to come in with a suitcase of money, had to bribe some corrupt Iranian figures, including some clergy. And they had to stage this coup d'etat. So like what took place is not new for Iranians. This was an iteration of something that happened many, many decades ago that had profound consequences. So this rupture, this failure is something you can't just shake off. And I think the desperation of this military adventurism for the imperialists is an expression of frustration that they can't crack this nut called the Islamic Republic. They just can't. It's a walnut they cannot crush with their stupid little imperial nutcracker because it frustrates them. It's too big of a country. It's too well defended. It can damage, as we've watched, too much expensive military hardware. So of course, this is the trade-off, and this is the classic trade-off between imperialists. They say to you, they come to you, they say, oh, nice country you have there. Your resources are ours. Now, we control them. If you want to fight back, we're going to smash you in your fucking teeth and destroy your whole world. This has been a historical story. This is the story of 500 years of European global history, which is to say, because Europe inscribed itself on the world in this 500-year period, and we're scarred by them forever, probably, not even in our fucking genomes. And we're speaking their language, for God's sake. So like all of these things have permanent traces. And yet something in 2026 has broken such to the degree that like a mid-tier power, Iran, I mean, it's a regional power, but it's certainly not, it doesn't have any reach beyond that. But it turns out that a small country punching above its weight, sanctioned to all hell, besieged, besmirched every day in the fucking Zionist-owned media, an army of your own fascist goons paraded around celebrating the imperialist murder on the streets of Toronto. Disgusting fascist goons dancing like freaking, those horses you see in the mall, like no rhythm, no taste, no nothing, no talent, but doing it for the performance, for the camera, so they can show people, oh, look, we won, we have an L. So the US got an L, the US Zio, Zio America, it got a big W, right? Killing this man, right? It got a big W. They got 1-2 nights of joy. Their people are celebrating. But at what cost? Basically, any opposition to fighting the US is gone in Iran. It unites the country. And this already happened in June, but it's more effective now. And the fact that Iranians didn't participate in these like coups, basically, because I don't think the Islamic Republic will fall without the acquiescence of the Iranian people. It was put in place by the Iranian people, and it will be taken out. It will be taken out of history by the Iranian people if it happens or when it happens, because everything falls eventually. But ultimately, the expression of national sovereignty that is the Islamic Republic stands today somehow, like Ali Alizadeh is a good friend of mine. He's a journalist in Iran. He said something to me years ago. Maybe it was on an episode. Maybe it was like in a conversation on the phone. He said, they cut Iran off at the knees. Like they cut the Islamic Republic off at the knees. Like, and imagine it could have been like a superpower, like the wealth, not just like people say, oh, oil. No, it's the human wealth of 90 million people's brains unlocked and working towards a goal, and not just surplus value for people halfway around the world, which is like what they want from you. So the fact that Iran is even here, the fact that Iran can bring down 3 F-15s, that's like almost $300 million in costs, like that it can lance the petrodollar at will, that it can defrock the pedo monarchies that are the vassal states collected and portrayed and pushed as a front for basically like oil concerns and like the military industrial complex and banks basically, right? So this node of oil, people, and this like resources, people, capital flowing constantly through that region, Iran has a gun to the head of that system. And they just have like started to pull the trigger just a little bit, just a little bit. And they said, oh, okay, is this really worth it to you? Do you really want to lose everything you have? And it seems like they do. That's what's crazy. Like, that's like, I thought you people worshiped money. That's like my feeling right now. Like, isn't this what you worship? Don't you love this stuff? So something irrational is happening inside of this imperialist beast. It is eating its own filth, maybe figuratively speaking, of trying to yield some kind of victory out of a long-term defeat, because we haven't even brought up the fact that they lost in Ukraine and they will eventually lose in Taiwan, right? The US empire has run out of easy targets. And now it's trying to get its least of the hardest target of the final bosses remaining for the US empire. The hardest ones are starting now. It's Iran, Russia, China. Well, Iran, let's say Iran, DPRK, Russia, China, in like that order. Sorry, Russians, you're number 2 in terms of threat level. But I think in that way, but remember, Iran can do damage to like the core of US financial power. It's not the military hardware. It's the military hardware is just an expression of the financial power the US has, because it can print money and the whole world gives it amazing stuff and resources and they get numbers on a screen back. Like, that's a crazy system. That's like alchemy of the highest order. And that system is going down. That system is what China is like pulling the rug on because the US left it no choice. And it feels to me like this is like a qualitative shift. God, I went on for like 20 fucking minutes, didn't I? Jeez.
No. There's so much like that. So the psyop is so fucking strong that you see it like on the streets of North York and Richmond Hill and TikToks everywhere of like these liberal people who are like, oh, thank you, United States. Like these liberal Iranians who live in those places. Oh, thank you, United States. You have given us, we have the future of capitalism and all this bullshit, all the way up to like this morning. I was reading a fucking piece in Vox from this senior correspondent that's like, oh, we don't know. Trump started a war in Iran and we don't fucking know why. And it's like, it's crazy to see that entire structure just fucking like the best way to put it, as you did, eating its own filth. Like, it's so bonkers to me. I don't have a question. I just like this, just bonkers.
And like the other astounding thing about this is that even though the information hole existed, when the protests were on, like in a couple of months ago, and all this news, and you can't really judge the right from the wrong, still certain clues would slip in. Like Financial Times had a story which pretty much confirmed that Mossad agents were on the ground. John Stewart, who by any means is sure he's I guess on the left of the kind of talk show host, but still a liberal by any measure. He's been actually talking about quite regularly that the atmosphere has been ramping up for this assault on Iran. In that I believe that was his video last week as well. This whole situation is, and then you have like what Derek is just talking about, like on social media you have these like TikToks and I mean in Toronto, because they did these marches which had only 3 locations, right? And Toronto was one of them, and the claimed that close to 350,000 people marched. I mean, that was Toronto police figures, so questionable at the very least. But the fact is that these are the same people who are again now over the last couple of days posting on social media, celebrating, dancing. What are you dancing for? That 160 plus schoolgirls got killed. Like, what are you celebrating here? What are the political stakes of your fight? If you claim to care for this country, what is this celebration and dancing for? Why the happiness? Why the joy? It just is the moral bankruptcy of this reaction is quite staggering to me. Yeah, I just want to add to that. Yeah.
And can I say, like, Tariq Ali actually reported that, like, from his sources, the left in Iran has been targeted during this assault. Like, as these, again, murderous assassination attempts, like, left figures have been the first targets precisely so that they can't fill any power vacuum, right? So anyway, just the idea that this is in any way ushering in a better, somehow, quote unquote, better future for Iran, like, it really has to be understood as a joke. Like, that's just not part of the conversation. And, even if there's a lot of opacity here, even if it's difficult to parse what's been going on because, we're a world away and there's all this conflictual information, it's ludicrous to imagine that this is a humane outcome for anyone involved. I also think that, like, it's ludicrous for us to think that this is the single driving force here has to be the broader Israeli project, honestly, because I actually think that from recent reporting, it's interesting that, like, the US is even starting to claim that they weren't responsible for Khomeini getting assassinated here, that they were surprised that that happened because that was an escalation beyond what they had in mind. Like, this is just, Trump trying to distract. I think that's fair to say. Trump is trying to distract from the Epstein piece because we just found out, like it was a week or two ago, that there's, like, increasingly good evidence about his own specific role in this story. A 13-year-old, evidence that has been seen by Congress people that has been disappeared from the Epstein file. I mean, it's, like, really clear how central his role is. So he absolutely wants to sort of, like, distract from that story. But I actually believe Trump wants the Venezuela situation, which is to say, like, he likes the little spectacle, a little bit of spectacle, a little quick spectacle, news story, positive headlines, all that stuff. That's great. And he kind of, like, believes we can just, like, move on. And now he wants to go after, we're hearing Cuba's next. I mean, it's really horrifying, but it's believable. I mean, that they're going to do the same thing to Cuba. He just loves this idea of, like, I'm just going to kill leaders all over the world and, like, exercise a sort of spectacular.
They tried to get Khamenei at one point. There was, like, a big organized attack. I think, like, it was over, like, 300 people. They were trying to get into the compound. Like, this is, like, they needed this W. They needed the lulls. Like I said this in another episode, like, it's empire of lulls, and getting something, like, getting pictures of Maduro in handcuffs gives them like a 3-day dopamine hit. But that's it. It only works for 3 days. But here's the problem. Like, Iran is not Venezuela. Venezuela is in the backyard of the US, so to speak, unfortunately, not to use imperialist language, but it's right fucking there. It's, like, not very long. And then on top of that, like, clearly there's some kind of contradictions happening, because a week later, after the guy is kidnapped, like, the CIA is back is, like, having meetings with, like, chief state officials. So, like, something to me in Venezuela feels broken. It disturbs me how little we hear about it. But here's the thing. The Iranian situation is much different because much bigger country. And on top of that, the military strategy of missiles, drones, and partly is because Venezuela doesn't have an Israel sitting right there. So, like, Israel's expansionist project triggered this kind of military development. And it wasn't just we see what's coming, that these 7 million, like, Jewish Europeans, like, with the help of the US empire and the EU vassal states and the Arab states who are also vassalized, who feed them and finance them, like, they want to enslave hundreds of millions of indigenous people around them. Like, that's what we're at. This is what they want. They want to make their racist worldview where actually a world. Okay, like, this is the translation from theory into praxis, that now beyond Palestine, it's called the Yinon Plan, Y-I-N-O-N. Just look it up. Like, this is a dream of settler colonialism. And there's a reason why fascists around the world, including Iranian ones, look to them and say, I like the cut of your jib, Mr. Israel. I can do that where I live. I can have an ethno-state too, which is why other people who like ethno-states go towards them, right? Like, the so-called Kurdish liberation struggle, Modi, but, like, forget Modi. I mean, that's easy, but the harder ones are, especially in the West, is to criticize the Kurdish liberation struggle, so-called liberation struggle, because there's people in those areas that they call Kurdistan that don't want to be part of it. And these things, anarchists in the West who shill for this stuff conveniently leave out. They also conveniently leave out the long history of collaboration between imperialism and these Kurdish conquistadors. So, like, these are basics of the thing that are just given kind of like, here you go. This is a basic assumption. Iran bad, Iran very bad, regime bad, is right wing, very bad, authoritarian. Like,
and let me pick up on that because but let me pick up on that point because this is the most remarkable statement that a leader of state could deliver in this moment. Speaking exactly to what you said, the Canadian government, Mark Carney, after his little fucking Davos performance where he sort of like, dazzled the world by telling the truth and going mask off, okay? What is his first response in this crucial moment when he has literally been facing American imperialism and threats of annexation, right? We're facing them in Canada. The 51st state talk is ongoing. The Greenland piece is right there. I mean, we all can see the writing on the wall. But what's his response? Quote, Canada's position remains clear. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the principal source of instability and terror throughout the Middle East. I mean, you just have to sit with those words after 2.5 years of genocide.
Written by Bibi himself, that fucking speech. Like, oh, you could stand up to the U.S. empire, but you can't stand up to Zionists. It's insane.
It's one of the most insane things I've ever seen. I've never seen anything like it. Unreal.
And this guy's saying this in India, right? Yeah, like he's
yes, that's true.
Modi goes to Israel. Modi comes back, and then Carney goes to India. I mean, this triangle is quite something to like appreciate, because in India particularly, like Modi has this has been fairly well documented how India was a long-standing friend to Palestine. That history has been remade. Was also a long-standing friend of Iran, mind you. And that, again, now that's also being remade. I mean, a year ago, he's posing with the Iranian leaders, and now can't even bring himself to condemn what's happened. Is still speaking in these kind of tones, in which just wants to appease Netanyahu. I mean, this on the subject of Epstein files, there was this one leak that came out about Modi. That when Modi went to meet Netanyahu, I mean, Epstein used this phrase that you went and just like danced in front of him and gave it, kind of showed him a good time. So this twisting of like history and memory is so central to this Zionist project, where old alliances get remade, and this expansionist drive within Israel is then like Sina was just saying, is then recognized by other like ethnostates like India now, where like, oh, actually, like what you're doing, we're going to not only mimic it, but also show you ways in which it can be done, buying of Israeli tech and, using of Pegasus to spy on journalists. There's just the overlap is quite striking and has been nurtured over time. And now it's really, these are the opportunities where they show which side they land on. Carney showing that, Modi showing that, and then you're just surrounded by these kind of demonic figures all around.
And then you're supposed to perform as if these are the gateways to respectability. You're supposed to perform as if there's some sort of diplomatic normalcy, right? Like, so this is the curse of like being sort of an Iranian statesman, is that you have to circulate in this international system which is hostile to you. You have to perform as if there is this global community. And then when they inevitably do the thing that imperialists always do, which they've been doing to indigenous people for 500 years, which is go against their back and break their promises, you're like, oh my God, like you then have a mandate to then say like, okay, we tried. So part of understanding like the Iranian posture and all this is like these Iranians, like this is a cliche Orientalist thing to say, but I'll say it. We are a Bazari people. We are a trade people, okay? You are not going to beat us at like haggling. Like we will haggle the shit out of you. But like part of the haggling here is the performance of negotiation. Right? And being like, yeah, sure, okay, we could talk about it. So the Omani is going out and being like, oh, like this is what happened, because like we're dealing with schizophrenic, or not even schizophrenic. Like these are people who just like lie. They're like more sociopath. They just lie. And the farce around this is to like sustain the larger mechanism of law, but like these are lawless people. So if anything, and of course, this was something that the resistance in Gaza really proved definitively, is that like the world system itself is fraudulent. That fig leaf of law and order and rights and war crimes and this and that, like that's all that can all be switched off if the people doing it are powerful enough, which of course we knew before. We saw that happen throughout history. But for whatever reason, the liberal fictions that had been sustaining themselves through the extremely violent periods of the 2000s, 2010s, right, where you had a genocidal wave of wars, either direct occupation wars like in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also dirty wars, really nasty, dirty wars like in Syria and Yemen, like Libya. They dress them up as rebellions, right? Like this is their first tactic. And this doesn't work in Iran. It just simply doesn't work. They used everything they can. They have every asset, and there are Kurdish groups, Baluchistani, Baloch groups, like these, but they're not very big. But because they have really powerful people behind them, they can punch above their weight and do things like kill some border guards. Like yesterday, I think 22 border guards died in the area of the country that I was born, like on the Iraq border, which is like a constant route. And also remember, like a lot of these protests, where you look at the map on the wall, a lot of these protests that were happening last in January, they just happen to be in small, out-of-the-way cities that nobody's ever heard of that happen to host missile installations. So like, this is not like the farce. You have to like immunize yourself to our news system first and foremost. I mean, that's not breaking. That's not a piece of advice. Obviously, everybody knows that. But with Iran too, they have the most insidious forms of propaganda, because liberals are completely, at least liberals will sometimes say stuff about Palestine. I'm talking like some principled liberals, but no liberal will ever defend Iran. If anything, they stomp on it fast as possible, because they're trained by 50 years of direct like propaganda and preceding with 1,000 years of Orientalist fantasy of all these these barbarous hordes invading us, blah, blah, blah. And what happens at the end of this story? They fucking have to bomb us in the middle of the night like cowards from Iraq, because they're too scared. And instantly they start taking hits that they've never taken before. So this is like a world historic juncture. It's crazy. I can't believe I'm just like sitting here talking, and there's there are battles in like the Straits of Hormuz between like Iranian naval ships, and like it's crazy. Like they're firing ballistics at it. Like all this power that the U.S. has built up, it's showing to itself what it is in less than 72 hours. It's been less than 72 hours.
Sina,
I'm just afraid that like we have cowboy crazies. Go ahead.
Yeah. On that point, like the point about like the way people have to frame this, even like discursively, particularly liberals in the West, I'm talking, and particularly people who are, I'd say, on the more like progressive side on Palestine, who are like very much talking about, you know, how many of those people I've seen preface anything they say like, we know Iran is bad and the regime is bad, but XYZ. It's blowing my mind, like watching that. And I think like a secondary thing they were saying is like this imperial like in like obsession with this rule-based order and human rights order that we see. Like those same people, I've been like, they'll like tweet or make a TikTok that says like, what's the ICC gonna do? What's the ICJ gonna do? As if they didn't just watch the last like 3 years of literally them saying things and nothing ever happening, as children are just being obliterated in Gaza. These like, I can't help but see the utter literal brain rot everywhere I go, even from people who I'm like, oh, you're a principled person. You've talked about, you've tweeted a lot of things I like about Gaza, but now you're doing this. Like, it's bonkers.
Like the fiction that that surrounds, like just to pick up on what Sina and Derek were just saying, this fiction is also one of the fictions in which way in which international relations have operated, especially say for I mean this cannot be exactly on point, but let's say last 40 years, like around say just I'm just trying to now slightly move towards the sport question as well, like around the 1980 and 84 Olympics, right? It would not be unfathomable for countries to not turn up to events, right? But over the last 40 years, this has not really happened. Like, no matter what goes on in the world, uh, every like sports event sees full participation, teams will participate. Whereas for a long time, actually before that, it was quite common on political grounds to, skip tournaments. I mean, in say in Asian sport, there was this understood boycott of like Israel entirely, and that's why Israel in football plays in Europe. Like that history is quite obvious to all of us. Now I think we're again returning to something of that kind of situation, right? Like there are enough grounds now. I mean, yesterday there were these unconfirmed, like rumors already swirling that can Iran now go to the World Cup, or will Iran's games all be moved to Mexico? Uh, in fact, like on principal grounds, like Iran has reasons to not participate in this World Cup now, and especially considering what has happened over the weekend. Uh, and there has been talks, just to boycott US, right? But this might be the closest thing we might get to a boycott here.
And I think we should come back to that in a second, but I also just want to add to that piece because, like, yeah, there's two things happening here. Where you're describing how the world system is obviously a sham, and so even fucking Carney said it. Even Carney said that, right? So we're at the point where, like, literally the libbiest of libs are telling us that the system is a lie. But at the same time, I feel at least a bit of a tension because it's like, as opposed to just saying the system is a lie and therefore we shouldn't talk about these institutions that have been established by liberalism, I actually do see some value in highlighting these hypocrisies, like rhetoric, like hammering on that point, because it is really a way, like, you use the liberals' own ethical system against them and say, like, none of your arguments actually hold water because it's just one hypocrisy after another, right? I mean, of course, it's mostly about past, like in the union negotiation, right? Like the arguments at the table when you're collective bargaining, that's not why you get one outcome or another. It's all about power, always. It's about, like, what's your leverage, what's your power. That will always dictate. But in the discursive space, right, you can provide cover nonetheless, right? You can run cover for some of the most egregious practices. And us pushing back against these hypocrisies, I think, is a useful way of undermining that cover. And with all that said, I actually think there's value in mentioning the Olympics piece here, which is that there is supposedly this thing called the Olympics truce, right? Which is to say that there's not supposed to be any kind of militarism 7 weeks before up to 7 weeks after the Olympic Games. And again, obviously, like, we can smile at that and say, like, this is bullshit, like, because it is in the same way that this is all bullshit. But guess what? That's literally the grounds by which Russia was banned by the International Olympic Committee, okay? Because it was within 4 days of the Olympics that they invaded Ukraine. And as a consequence of that, they were actually banned from the Beijing Paralympic Games that had not started to take place yet, but not only from the next Olympics, which we just saw, right? So they continue to be banned. This is why, like, the US and Canada are talking about all their hockey bona fides, but, like, notice how there was no Russia in there. Well, this is the story. This is why Russia wasn't there, right? And so I want to be clear. This is a direct violation of the Olympic truce, okay? Like, this invasion happened within 6 days. It was 6 days of the end of the Olympics, not even to mention the Paralympics, which is supposed to also be part of the Olympic truce. So the United States and Israel should be out of the Paralympics immediately, and the Los Angeles Games in 2028 should be stripped of the United States based on the IOC's own logic.
Yeah, no, that's when did the rules ever apply? Like, the rules never apply to, like, I mean, literally, Ben Gvir was saying Jews are above the law. He literally said that. So, like, Zionists say and do stuff that liberals are too afraid to, and they do it for them. And so, like, the dirty little secret of Zionism, that it's, like, really the highest form of, like, European liberalism, right? Because European liberalism has this, like, ridiculous thing where it's like, oh yeah, we believe in freedom. We believe in all these things. We believe in equality. We believe in diversity. But we're also extremely racist. Like, this same dichotomy, because all those things can go out the window when you're racist. They're like, oh, they're just not human. Like, oh, they're just, it's fine. You don't have to, they don't count. Right? And so this is always how it will be. This will always how it will be, and imperialists will always do that. Now, the question is, I struggle with this, and I say, you have to immunize yourself from the West. You have to quarantine yourself from the West, because they will never stop. This is an unstoppable, annoying, like, historical annoyance, and it will never stop. And the only solution is to build a firewall around yourself and your country to stop it from coming in. Now, here's the problem that Iranians have, that the Iranian state has. Like, and I mean that like firewall, like, in a digital way. So, for instance, erecting your own internet. Iran is trying to do this. I don't know if it will work. I honestly don't know if it will work. After the digital cutoff, there was like talk of like a kind of internal internet. But basically, like, it's at a certain point, it makes sense to me why DPRK is like walled off from almost every sort of global system, like at least the global, fake global systems that are run through the West, like the Olympics. I mean, they're not, but like they're in the Olympics, obviously, but like this is not, Imperialism is a bad example, but like that Western system is something that the West uses as a carrot for a certain class of Iranians. And those people eventually find their way, some of those people find their way into politics and media and power. Right. And so in Iran, you actually do have two quarreling centers of power. Now, that liberal center, I think, is gone. I don't think the liberal, even though there's still a liberal president and he's like associated with this, and people are some like, resistoid types, like sort of principalists, it's in the jargon here, we call them hardliners, say that, oh, Pezeshkian went soft on what was a coup attempt. There was an internal coup attempt, according to the Iranian state, and they arrested these people, and it hasn't been really made public, although they call it on state TV coup d'etat of this event. It wasn't just like protests or riots, that it was something wider, which makes sense. Because why would you just like have some riots on the streets? Why would you just have an insurgency if it had nothing behind it, right? Like an insurgency is a tool. So you don't just like use a tool, a hammer on the ground and then put the hammer away. It's like, oh, job well done. It's in service of something. You're building something. So like that to me in all of this helps make sense, is understanding the course correction required on the imperialist part is like, oh, well, this didn't work. This like creative chaos, like the term from this is like a term that like I think it was from like a U.S. counterinsurgency manual or something. It was, and Max Blumenthal used it as the title of his great book on Syria and the organized, or on ISIS basically, which was the management of savagery, right? And so like this is their tool. They have savagery in their hands and they can unleash it like it's some insane sort of violent dove, and and just kind of like terrorize the country. But Iran is too strong and could resist it, and the state apparatus is too technologically advanced, and it's not 1953 anymore. We're not just like 70% illiterate peasants. Like Iran's statecraft is more mature, and on top of that, it's reinforced by other stronger forms of statecraft, aka China, right, which has an elaborate internal security system for this very reason. Okay, so like when we say countries are authoritarian, no, they don't want you there. They don't want the West there. Okay, they want you to not be there. It's like a no homers club, and it's a no West, right? Like that for me is something I truly want people to understand, is that walling yourself off is sometimes your only choice. Unfortunately, Iran doesn't have that choice because we have a very West-oriented population. A chunk of Iranians are extremely Western-oriented. Nothing would make them happier than to become some form of Westoid. I have them in my family, okay? I literally have them in my family. And I argue with them. I'm like, you don't know what this country is. I may not know Iran as you do, and I say this to them. Like, we have these arguments, but you don't know what Canada is. I can tell you what Canada is. It is a real estate scheme, okay? It is a long-running real estate scam, and you are desperate to be part of it as it's failing. So like, and then in these conversations, which like sounds harsher than the cause, because like I get what they're saying. Like for them, it's hard to be in Iran, and I get it. Like, I mean, I don't get it. I wasn't living there, but I mean, in the sense of that, if something is bad for you in a place, you want to leave. This is a natural inclination. But shockingly, a huge number of them end up going back. But also, and also like, it's a realization that like the same problems that affect Iranians over there are coming to you here in different form. Not as extreme, okay, fine, but like neoliberalism is a force here as much as it is in Iran. And in fact, it's probably more of a force here than it is in Iran. Iran still retains somewhat of like a structure of like a socialist economy. There's still very generous gas subsidies. Like food is relatively like the cost of it goes up, but relative to like and inflation is like killer for people. And that's really what kills people. But in the sense that Iranians are food independent. And that's something that we would lose if there was kind of like fracturing of the country, which won't happen. But it's, in all of this is to say the point about the Olympics is like, that's a fucking bitter pill, because you look to that with national pride. And that's why they did it to Russians. They were like, oh, sorry, yoink,
Yes.
you worked so hard. We're going to take that off of you and we're going to humiliate you by putting up fucking Ukrainians every 10 seconds in our stupid broadcasts. Like, that's why they did it to Russia, just to humiliate them. And also to make it easier for them to win, because Russians are freaking good.
So where does the World Cup fit in this? Because do you imagine that Iran may actually, because I think it's a great point. So I'm thinking two things at once here, right? Like one, that firewall notion that you're describing, extricating from something like the World Cup or the Olympics would be like a really extreme form. But you're actually, I think pointing to a very reasonable contradiction, which is that like people rightfully have a great deal of pride and emotional investment in participating in these sort of global things, which everyone has a right to. I mean, like it should be a commons, right? It should be a collective enterprise that everyone has access to. So like, I guess there's two questions here. One, might we actually see Iran, like forget about the US prohibiting, I don't think that ultimately they will be allowed to do, like there'll be all kinds of visa bullshit that they'll try to pull, and I'm sure that they'll pull that kind of shit, but like FIFA won't allow them to go to the step of actually banning Iran from participating. But
Not sure. I'm not sure, Nathan. At left, the really critical people are talking about banning Israel in the United States. I think it's actually more likely that Iran would be banned by the various imperialist organizations.
Absolutely.
Way more likely.
And that's actually going to create an even bigger like political standpoint between Iranian footballers and the Iranian state, because many like what Sina was earlier talking about, like this desire to become more Western and like move and leave Iran. That's a lot of the Iranian football stars epitomize that, right? Because in their networks through which they move, like the biggest leagues are in Europe, so they go and play for European clubs and then they represent them. Like players like Ali Daei was big, now Mehdi Taremi, who's a striker, and these are also players who've actually spoken out against the Iranian government, right? So if let's say Iran was to be kicked out, or or some kind of sanction was to follow, or let's say if the Iranian government decided not to participate, that's going to create another flashpoint, because Iran footballers and the Iran government have been at loggerheads for different reasons. This is particularly difficult one, I think, for the Iran government to decide on, because of the question of national pride. I mean, Iran representing Iranian players representing the country at the World Cup is a huge deal. Iran beat the USA in 1998 World Cup. You can go to FIFA, like the FIFA, TV, like all the classic matches. They still show that game.
I still remember it. I remember every minute of that game. I remember every second of that game. Iranians showed up with like 15 different presents. And the US were like, this is weird. They had like pistachios, like they did full Iranian hospitality. And the American uncivilized fucking hounds were like, what do we do? Do we give them a bottle of Gatorade? Fucking goons. No, it's right. It's right. It's like totally right. This is our eternal dilemma. Like, how do you, and then there's like a more, like there's one of like, oh, let's just make the Westoids happy. Let's just give in on this one thing. Like, there's that problem. But then there's like the other, like more troubling problem of like, yeah, we want to be part of this world. Who says that these like, if other countries who are also resistant to the West, who also reject the West, can be part of this, like, why can't we? Like, this doesn't have to necessarily be a Westoid thing, but unfortunately, the systems around them, the finances, the media, all of this bullshit around them is what is the sinews, and how like visa shit, like the hexing of these teams they use. And compradors are like the first line, by the way, of all of this, is that they stand outside of stadiums, make a complete farce of themselves, and they basically ruin everyone's fun. Like it's like a weird, like they basically have found like an army of Iranian fascists living, Gusano fascists, and they deploy them at times like this. And in sport, doing through sports will be another one. But it's an impossible contradiction to resolve, because if you leave that system, then your people feel like, oh, geez, like, what are we? Are we fucking second class? Because then you're kind of saying, yeah, we're not part. But then if you stay in that system, you're hexed. God knows what they do to you. They probably surveil the players. They probably like try to lure them away. Like, the fuckery never ends. So like, what do you do? And it came to the point where they're literally bombing us, carpet bombing us in the streets, like to this point, because we haven't submit to this regime of imperial domination, where you like take your position in the global supply chain as a good brown person, like everyone else around us. And the few places that resist are hammered for just violently and just terrified. Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq. And those are the people who are now standing up, including Pakistanis. I mean, this Pandora's box they've opened, I mean, it's cliche by now, but really like this need for a W, because it's easy. It's one thing to like say, I was thinking about Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, like the spiritual founder, one of the key figures, basically a key figure, like the founding father of the Islamic resistance in Gaza. I remember he was assassinated. I remember, Nate, we were in like OAC or something. And I remember like Rosie DiMano, fucking fascist, like just jumped into high gear. Oh, because he had like a raspy voice. He's like, oh, his voice, whisper of hate or some bullshit like that. I still remember it to this day. And so like they've scaled that up from like assassinating like leaders to like and obviously that's something they've done, Nasrallah, and like everybody, any leader, any major leader dies and gets martyred, right? And like this is the fate. You either like survive and turn into like a turncoat, right? Or you die and you're a hero. Like it's the Batman Knight Returns whatever conundrum of like, live long enough and you can do that. But this even someone like Gaddafi, right? Gaddafi did a heel turn in the end and like basically caved to the West, and they still killed him. Right? They still killed him. They basically paid off the Lockerbie stuff and started basically letting in the West. And what did they immediately do? Organize a dirty war and strike him, kill him with a NATO plane, or like basically wound him. And then he was like bayoneted up his anus and then like shot in the head. Like, that's what they wanted for all of this. It didn't work in Syria because Russians spoiled their fun. Probably as like revenge, not any love for Assad, or maybe Assad was in on it. I still don't know. I still can't really be sure that like the reason why he's still alive is because he allowed this to happen and like didn't stop it. That could be something. But like if that wasn't the case, then somebody got him out. We know who got him out, like against the will of the imperialists, which would be Russian. And so like the fact that he's still alive, it's a rare oddity that like otherwise, like you resist this empire, you will die. But it's a question of what you do with your time on this earth to build up a wider network of resistance behind you. And that is really the legacy of Ali Khamenei. So that, because they took that revolutionary endeavor of 1979 and they translated it into 47 years of resistance to U.S. imperialism, to anti-imperialist resistance. Like that is a project of the Iranian people. That is an accomplishment of the Iranian people, no matter how many unhinged, like melodramatic, diasporoid losers scream about it and bellyache about it. This fact won't be a change, that Iran was the biggest backer of modern history's most important anti-colonial liberation struggle, right? Iran is the greatest state friend of Palestine. There are others, a handful of them. Venezuela was one. Unfortunately, I don't know. I don't want to make any I don't want to make any assumptions about what's going to happen, but it doesn't look good. But like that's and abide and like kneeling to the ethno-state, kneeling to the West. These are the same thing now. Like bowing to it and like joining the alliance, which is what they're doing to Syria and saying like, okay, you have to accept this now. And of course, they're the ones who put in fucking power. But like, this is the game, and Iran resists, and it successfully resists, and it inflicts severe costs on the imperialists in a way they haven't experienced in a long time, right? Like this is not Iraq 2003, a starved country. This is not Iraq 1991, itself a battered down army because they had been doing the dirty work of the CIA against Iran for 8 fucking years at the cost of a lot of men and an incredible amount of hardware. Now they were backed by the fucking Gulf and the USSR and the West. So they got a lot of that hardware cheap and not very expensive, but their people and the cost to their country, infrastructure, all that stuff. And because that's what it was designed to bleed Iran. But that was like the first test of the Islamic Republic, was that war, that 8-year-long war. So if you're telling me a 4-day bombing campaign is going to scare the Islamic Republic into, it's actually the very opposite. You're consolidating national consensus around the legitimacy of this project. Because the resistoids can say, see, didn't we fucking tell you so? Negotiate with these fuckers, and what do? They bomb you. After they've starved you and besmirched you and insulted you and stolen you and puppeted around the worst elements of your people to denounce you, right? Like after they've done that, you're going to go and beg them for an agreement. I mean, in retrospect, anyone who was involved with the JCPOA should be like basically tarred and feathered. And because whatever, I mean, the Iranian state approved it, Khamenei approved it. So, and ultimately, and if you believe the Westoid lies about him controlling the whole state and having veto power, I don't think that's the case. Iran has a functioning political system that quarrels, let's say, with the, to put it uneloquently, deep state that exists there. And even then, there were like alterations after 2009, I remember, to that deep state. Like it's a dynamic interaction of the Iranian state to these various currents. But June War was the beginning of the end of that kind of, okay, let's make it work with these part of our population that wants to deal with the West. And like this now is done. Like it's the hardliners, so-called principalists is what they call themselves, now have come carte blanche to say, like, we fucking told you so. You cannot trust these people. You can only fight them and fight them with everything you have because they want to enslave you. And this is something that liberals will never get because they are liberals, Iranian liberals. So like my only, I guess one takeaway, if people can, from this is that you should distrust Iranian liberals as much as you should distrust any other liberal because they have the same mental deficiencies and insufficiency and ethical insufficiencies and also fascist leanings because they're the ones who have been saying, oh, these poor sad protesters with machetes and shotguns. Okay, and grenades and doing firebombing. Like this would never be normalized by them here. If these people so much as threw a brick into a window, they would jump off a fucking cliff out of terror and shock. Like if they witnessed something like that at a protest. So the fascism of liberals comes out in moments like Iran crises because they show who they are. And this is including Iranian liberals to left. Like Verso was publishing some bullshit, absolute bullshit about what was happening as the country was dark. The author, Eskandar Sadeghi Burjadi, had no proof as to what was happening. And he was saying, oh, regime killing this, oh, and even admitting that, oh, yeah, there's insurgency elements to all this. We had, and then basically still keeping to script. I mean, that is Verso. That's our Trotskyite Marxist elders. I mean, you have anarchists talking about, oh, the necessity of burning clerical fascism, endorsing the burning of mosques and masjids. Like, this is evil practice. This is fascist ISIS behavior. This is Zionist behavior. Zionists attack mosques. Okay, ISIS attacks other people's mosques. The US empire attacks mosques. Iranians don't do that. If they do that, they're freaks who should be dealt with harshly, because that is Iranian cultural patrimony. It exists far beyond any kind of political state institution. You're going to talk about burning them down, historic sites? No, this is Zionism. I refuse to believe it. And liberals, once again, help them in Iran. They help them. Look it up. Go find that horrible article in Verso, the stupid fucking blog that nobody reads, and read it now in retrospect.
Oh, yeah, I mean, this was a much needed immunization from, I think, what is out there currently, and what is going to be coming out in droves, I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks from Western liberal media of various sources. So thank you for providing us with that antidote, if you will, and walking us through some of this and walking our listeners through this take, because I can't take another shit lib interpretation of what's happening. So Sina, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm sure we'll see you around a little bit more often.
Thank you, guys. This was fun. We should